Alright, so now that we've kind of gone over ways of selecting, let's just kind of go over how the browser deals with certain things, like widths and things like that. So we talked about box model last module, and we got into things like setting widths, using the width property. So to understand a little bit more about the width property, we have to understand how the browser normally sets a width. So how your browser sets the width normally is based on whether you are working with inline HTML tags versus block tags. Okay. So every HTML tag can be divided into two major categories, inline and block. Okay. Best way to look at it is find a reference for it. So for instance, I have some links here you guys can use if you just want to look at it. This is the Mozilla document. It kind of has all the information you need about the internet. And this lists every single inline element. So inline elements would be things like the hyperlink or the A tag, things like the EM tag, the IMG tag, S tag for strike through, strong tag, things like that, U tag, the video tag. Block level elements would be stuff like the article tag, the div tag, figure tag, footer tag, form tag. Basically anything that's a container tag would pretty much be a block tag. And so the way it works is that if we have something that's a block tag, so here I have, these are a couple blocks. This is a block. And currently I have some background colors set for them. So this is like, let's say I add a background color here. So I'm going to preview this. You'll notice that here, two blocks can never be in the same space horizontally. That's just how they are. Block elements always go the width of its parent. So in this case, my H1 is the width of its parent, or 100% the width. In this case, because the H1's parent is the body tag, essentially what that means is my H1 will be as big as my body, which is really saying that it's going to be as big as the page. Okay. So you can see here that when I highlight it, even though the text only goes to out here, it really, in terms of the spacing, the width, it takes up the width all the way across the page in this particular case. Okay. Inline elements are a little bit different in that inline elements are based on the amount of content inside of the tag. So in other words, since this is a strong tag, this is an EM tag, this is a span, which is another inline element. However, because there's only one word, that's how long it is. The more content, so here I have 2 words, then it's longer. So it's based literally on the amount of content. The more content, the wider it is. Okay, so that's the difference between whether something is an inline versus a block element. So here I have this setup here. I have this header tag, and it's inside of a div. I'm going to preview this page. So this is a div, it's a block element. And because it's a block, that means it's 100% of its parent, which means by default, it should go all the way across the page. Okay. At any time, though, you can reset it by using the width property that we learned. So if I did 600, then it's not going to be defaultly 100% of its parent, but rather just whatever value you set. So now this div is 600. But we have something interesting. This became 600, but it has its own children. And remember that the children are 100% of its parent. So because this is 100% of this, when this became 600, that meant the header, the section, and the main all also became 600. So if I go inside of here, if I click on header, I can't move my mouse because it'll get rid of the width, but you can see where it says 600 times, or 600 by 50.5, or see how they're all a width of 600? Because they're all based on the div. If I at any point change the size of the div, it's going to change the width of all the children because they're 100% of their parent. Okay. Where this can be kind of interesting is I'm going to take this section here and I'm going to make it, instead of based on a finite amount like 50% by like 400 pixels or 1,000 pixels, I'm going to make it based on a percentage. Okay. So I'm setting this to 50%. Now what this means is this section is going to be 50% of whatever its parent is. The parent in this case is 600, so 50% of that would mean that when I refresh this, oops, oh, sorry about that. This section here should now become 300 because it's based on its parent. Let's say that I can do this even more. So I'm going to take this section, I'm going to set this to the main too. Let's set the main to 50%. So width 50%. So it's going to be kind of similar in that it's going to be 300 because it's half of the container here. Notice that the main has a container inside of it. And I'm going to set this figure to 50%. So let's look at this. This is 50% of its parent, which is the main. This is 50% of its parent, which is the div. If the div is 600, that makes the main 300, and that makes the figure's width 150. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So if I come back in here, here's the figure. If I was to highlight it, you can see that the width is 150. And at any point, if I change this, since all of these numbers are all based on the width of my div, if I make this 1,000, everything else is going to automatically update because it's all based on percentages. This is going to be 50% of 1,000 now instead of 600, so this is going to become 500. This is 50% of 500, so this is going to become 250, so on and so on and so on. Okay, so when you have these block elements, their width is defaultly, if there's no other CSS, based on the parent, and it's 100%. But if you start to add in either a finite amount, that'll override that, or you might enter in a percentage, but the percentage is not based on the page as a whole, but instead based on its direct parent. Speaking of box model, I want to talk about one extra thing here. So I have 3 sections, okay? I have a section, an article, and an A side. And I'm going to save, and I'm going to preview this in a browser. I get something that looks like this, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a width for this section. I'm going to set this width to 400 pixels. And I'm also going to set the article to a width of 400 pixels. Okay, so I'm going to set both to 400. 1, 2. And then I'm actually going to go to the second one here, and I'm going to add some padding of 25 pixels. And when I do that, you'll notice that even though both my section and my article have a width of 400, that when they're displayed in the browser, that the article is longer. Okay, now why is that? Well, here's how your browser figures out the width of something. When we use the CSS width property, that's not actually the full width. Oops. So what I mean by that is when you set your dimensions, there's something called, there's the CSS width property, but then there's actually the total width. Okay, and your total width is actually the width plus right padding plus left padding plus right border plus left border plus right margin plus left margin. Okay, so even though this is 400 and this is 400, this actually has padding on it. And not only does it have padding, it technically has padding on the left and the right. So that's 400 plus padding on the left, which is 25, plus padding on the right, which is 25. So this is 400, and this is actually 450 when it actually gets calculated in the browser. So if I right-click and inspect, and I select this article, you'll see it's actually set to a width of 450. Okay, I'm going to go to this last one, this A side. Let's also set this to a width of 400. And let's also set this to a padding of 25. And I'm going to add a border to this of about 15 pixel solid black. So once again, this is actually bigger than this, and it's actually bigger than this. Why is that? Well, because remember, the total width is adding in padding, border, and margin. Okay, so here, this is adding in 400 pixels, it's adding in padding on the left and the right, and it's also adding in the 15 pixels of border on the left and the right. So this one is actually 480, so this is 400, 450, 480 when all the calculations are done. So if I right click and I choose the A side here, you can see how the width is set to 480. So my point of showing you this is just to understand that when you set the CSS width property, it's not the total width. You still have to calculate things like padding, margin, and border as part of the calculation for the true width when you start doing the layout. Okay?